Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are tackling design secure architectures. And let me tell you, this is a huge chunk of the AWS Solutions Architect Associate exam. But here's the thing, mastering this isn't just about memorizing services to pass a test. It's about really learning to think like a security-focused architect. And in the next few minutes, that's exactly what we're going to do.
So here's our game plan. We're going to build a complete mental model for AWS security, one layer at a time. First, we'll cover the basic ground rules. Then, we'll get into the most important part, your primary perimeter, which is all about identity. After that, we'll build the walls with network and data defenses, set up our watchtowers with monitoring, and then wrap it all up with the solid strategy to crush these questions on exam day.
Okay, let's jump right in. First things first, what does the exam actually mean when it says designing security? This is super important. It's not asking you to write code or, click through the console to set up a firewall. Nope. It's all about the big picture, high-level architectural choices you make right from the start.
You're going to see this pop up constantly in those scenario-based questions, the ones where security is a non-negotiable business requirement. And the number one thing you need to remember is this: security has to be baked into the foundation of your architecture. If you try to just bolt it on at the end, well, it's going to be less effective, way more expensive, and for the exam, it's pretty much always the wrong answer.
All right, so before you can even think about designing a secure architecture, you've got to answer a really basic question. What are you actually responsible for? And what is AWS responsible for? This is where the shared responsibility model comes in. And trust me, this is a concept that trips up a ton of people.
So here's the best way to think about it. AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud. Think of it like this. They built this amazing, super secure apartment building. It's got guards, cameras, the whole deal. But you are responsible for security in the cloud. That means it's on you to lock your own apartment door, decide who gets a key, and make sure all your stuff inside is safe.
Now, this is the really interesting part. Your responsibility isn't a fixed thing. It's more like a sliding scale. For example, if you're using an EC2 instance, you're pretty far down the you-do-it end. You've got to patch the operating system, configure the firewalls. That's a lot on your plate. But if you use something like Lambda, a fully managed service, AWS takes care of almost all of that for you. And knowing where different services fall on this spectrum, that is a huge part of being a solutions architect.
So that whole idea of managing who gets a key, well, that leads us perfectly into the absolute most critical part of any secure design: identity and access management, or IAM. In the old days, we thought of a network firewall as our main defense. That's just not true in the cloud anymore. Your new perimeter, your first line of defense, is identity.
So let's imagine an exam question. They tell you to design a brand new, super secure web app for sensitive user data. What's the very first security control you should be thinking about? Is it the network design with your VPCs and subnets? Is it the encryption keys? Maybe the firewall rules?
No. The answer is always identity. The right way to think about this, and the way AWS is testing you, is identity first. It's like, you wouldn't build a bank vault and then figure out who gets a key, right? Of course not. You first create a super strict list of who can get in and exactly what they're allowed to do inside. Everything else, all the other security, gets built around that fundamental control.
And that right there brings us to probably the single most important security concept you need to know: the principle of least privilege. This isn't just some nice-to-have best practice. On the exam, this is often the one thing that separates the right answer from the wrong ones. The rule is simple. You always give a user or a service the absolute minimum permissions it needs to do its job. Nothing more.
So as an architect, your designs have to reflect this. On the exam, if you see a choice between using long-term access keys or using temporary credentials with an IAM role, just pick the role. It's almost always the right answer. Same thing goes for your application's users. If they need to sign up and log in, you design a solution with a managed service like Cognito. You don't try to build your own system from scratch. That's a security nightmare.
Okay, so we've nailed down who can do what. The next layer in our defense is all about where they can do it. We need to build secure boundaries and, of course, protect the actual data that's living inside them.
Think of this as your architect's toolkit for network security. You've got the foundational stuff, like your VPC, which is basically your own private, isolated section of the AWS cloud. And then you have these specialized tools, like AWS WAF, which acts like a bodyguard for your web applications. Your job, as the architect, is to look at the problem and know which tool to pull out of the bag.
Now, when we talk about protecting data, the exam is absolutely going to test you on two key concepts: encryption in transit and encryption at rest. The easiest way to remember it is this. Encryption in transit is like putting your money in an armored truck when it's moving between banks. Encryption at rest is locking that same money inside the bank's vault. A good architect knows you don't pick one. You have to do both.
So, when you see an exam question that mentions sensitive data or strict compliance, these services should immediately pop into your head. KMS, the Key Management Service, is going to be your go-to for most things. But if the question specifically calls out something like dedicated hardware or a FIPS 142 Level 3 validation, that's a huge flashing sign telling you to choose Cloud HSM. And if they talk about needing records that can never be changed, that's your cue for S3 object lock.
You know, a really secure architecture is never something you just set up once and then forget about. A smart architect always assumes that eventually one of your defenses might fail. And that's why this next layer is so critical. It's all about detection and response. It's not enough to just build strong walls. You also need guards up on the watchtower looking for trouble.
This whole idea is called defense in depth, and it's a core security principle. Think about it. Your security groups, they're like the castle walls. They're there to prevent people from getting in. But a service like Amazon Guard Duty, that's the guard on the watchtower. It's actively detecting suspicious behavior and sounding the alarm. This way, if one thing fails, your whole system doesn't come crashing down. Okay, knowing the specific job of each of these services is an absolute game changer for the exam, so let's break it down really simply. CloudTrail tells you who did what and when. It's your audit trail. Guard Duty is your threat detector. It's constantly asking, is anything weird or suspicious going on? And then there's Amazon Inspector, which is your vulnerability scanner. It's asking, are there any known security holes in my setup? Knowing which service answers which question is key.
All right, we've built our entire layered security model. Now for the final piece of the puzzle. Let's talk strategy. How do you take all this knowledge and use it to just systematically tear apart a tricky security question on the exam and get it right every time?
This right here, this is the mindset you have to have. The exam doesn't care if you've memorized a CLI command. It is testing your judgment as an architect. Can you look at a problem with all its requirements and justify why one design choice is better, more secure, or more effective than another? That's the whole game.
So when you're staring at a security question on the exam, run it through this mental checklist. First, immediately cross out any options that are obviously not secure. Next, get rid of any answers that have you doing work that you know is AWS's job under the shared responsibility model. And finally, be super clear. Does the question ask you to prevent a problem or to detect a problem? That distinction will often point you straight to the right service. So, to wrap it all up, designing a secure AWS architecture is never about just one thing. It's a complete system. You have to understand the shared responsibility model. You have to start with identity first. You need to protect your stuff with multiple layers of defense, and you have to be watching it all the time.
I really hope this deep dive helps you feel way more confident about the security domain for your exam. If you got something out of it, hitting that like and subscribe button would be awesome. But now I really want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what's a security scenario that's been stumping you. Maybe securing a serverless app or designing for something like HIPAA compliance? Let me know and we might just cover it in our next one. Thanks for watching.